What if both Luffy and Ace had awakened their devil fruits during the Marineford War? With two unstoppable brothers unleashing their true power on the battlefield, how would that have shifted the tide of war and the future of One Piece itself? The battlefield was chaos. Cannons, blades, and screams echoed through the air, and Ace felt it all. Shackled atop the execution platform, he watched his crew risk everything for him. Marco soared overhead, clashing with admirals. Jozu held back powerful foes. Vista cut through enemies with deadly grace. And at the center of it all stood Whitebeard, old, wounded, and sick, yet still a force of nature. His Bicento shattered the ground with every swing, the air cracking around him. Even without full haki, his might was undeniable. But to Ace, it was more than strength. It was the pain of knowing they were all here for him. He had caused this. He had chased Blackbeard out of pride, and he had lost. Everyone had warned him not to go after Blackbeard out of revenge, but he didn't listen. And now his entire family was thrown into a war. He thought for a second about Luffy, and as if by fate, a bunch of people were seen crashing down into the battlefield. A group of prisoners? Ace narrowed his gaze, and his heart almost shut down when he saw it. His brother was here. Luffy, his little brother, had fallen from the sky, literally, landing with a crash. And in the next moment, he was screaming and fighting through Marines to get to the execution platform. He had broken into Impel Down. He had gathered a crew of prisoners. And now he was here, in the middle of a war. For Ace, Ace tried to struggle against his shackles, but the sea stone had sapped the strength from him. Even Garp clenched his fist with tears in his eyes, seeing what was happening to his grandsons. But against all odds, Luffy actually tore through the Marines and somehow reached the execution platform. Ace could hardly believe it. His brother, his tiny, reckless, stupid little brother, was right in front of him. And then, just like that, the shackles were opened and Ace was free. Alarms rang out, and the Marines scrambled as Ace let the fury inside him burst, and he crashed into the battlefield like a meteor, standing beside his brother. It was time to retreat. The two ended up moving back to the Whitebeard pirates. But then, Admiral Sakazuki came. Sakazuki taunted Ace and disrespected his foster father, which made Ace snap. Despite all rational thinking, Ace lunged at Sakazuki. But in the fight, he realized that the Admiral was much stronger than he was. Ace was quickly beaten and outclassed. And then, Sakazuki moved toward his brother. His fists were molten rock, dripping lava as he approached. The ground sizzled beneath him. Luffy was helpless. And then everything slowed down for Ace. He saw the Admiral's fist rise, glowing bright red with heat. Luffy was still catching his breath. Too tired, too slow, the fist came down. Ace didn't think at all, but by instinct, it was like something triggered deep inside him. He turned into flames and shot out in a compressed blast that had gone from orange to white and then finally to blue. The air around Ace warped up as he shot like lightning towards Sakazuki, and his flaming fist crashed against Sakazuki's magma. There was no contact. The two forces clashed inches apart, and then Sakazuki was sent flying back in a streak of red, with Ace pushing against him. Ace stopped midway as Sakazuki continued flying before crashing into a boulder. Ace stood tall with blue flames sparking around him. It was like he was a star, and the temperature of his flames rose to the point where the ground was beginning to melt under his feet. He looked at Luffy, still standing, stunned by the heat but unharmed. Ace smiled through the fire at him and told him to sit tight while he dealt with the Admiral. His devil fruit had awakened, but even Ace knew that he couldn't hold this form for too long. He was too tired, but he wasn't going to fall here and let his brother die. Sakazuki rose from the wreckage, his coat burned and face twisted in fury. Lava poured from his fists again as he lunged toward Ace. The two clashed, fire against magma, in a battle so hot that the ice covering Marineford began to crack and vanish beneath their feet. Steam rose in thick clouds. Each blow from Sakazuki dropped molten rock to the ground. But Ace's flames were even hotter now than the magma. They twisted and curved through the air, dancing around the Admiral's defenses. A punch of flame struck Sakazuki's ribs and sent him sliding across the ground. The lava that hit Ace's shoulder was burned away instantly, as if the fire refused to be touched. For the first time, Sakazuki was on the back foot. Ace moved like lightning, with his speed enhanced by his awakening, and every flame he summoned was stronger than the last. Jets of fire shot from his arms, and with a swing, he summoned a burning whip that cracked the sky in two. A massive explosion tore through the battlefield, and Marines scattered. But the moment didn't last for too long, as suddenly, a golden light shot down from the sky. In an instant, Kizaru appeared beside Sakazuki, his body shimmering with particles of sunlight. Before Ace could react, a beam of light slammed into his side. He flew across the ground, fire trailing behind him as he crashed through rubble. Kizaru hovered in the air, glowing faintly, and sent another blast of light. Ace rolled, barely dodging, but the ground around him exploded in sparks. Now the fight was 2 against 1. Sakazuki came from the front, fists bursting with magma, while Kizaru attacked from the air, sending down sharp beams of light. Ace tried to hold them off, flames whipping around him like a shield, but it was too much. Every time he blocked one, the other would land a hit. But the worst problem was that he was having a hard time keeping up his strength. His flames started mellowing out, going from blue to white. His fireballs became smaller, and his control over them began to slip. The heat around him began to fade like a dying sun. He staggered as another beam hit his leg. Sakazuki charged with a lava-covered punch that sent him sliding back across the ground. Ace dropped to one knee. He was burning up, but not in a good way. His strength was leaving him. The fire fire that had answered him earlier now wavered like a candle in the wind. Two admirals were too much. Even with his awakening, he couldn't stop both of them alone. Luffy was looking at all of this, and his body began to tremble from anger. His heart was pounding in his chest, and he screamed loudly for Ace. His conqueror's haki flowed out, and his heartbeat became louder and louder. It was like the sound of a drum. Luffy's feelings for his brother had made something change inside of him, and suddenly, his conqueror's haki began flowing out in massive waves. Luffy's body floated upwards, and his hair began turning white as smoke began to surround him. The sound filled him. His legs moved on their own, almost cartoon-like. His body swelled and bounced. Clouds circled his neck. Steam puffed from his mouth. His sandals sparked as they touched the ground. Luffy had awakened. He laughed, not out of joy, but from the feeling of pure freedom running through his veins. The battlefield twisted around him. The ground became soft and bendy under his feet. Even the sky seemed to stretch. And then, Luffy locked eyes with Sakazuki, who was looking right at him. Even Ace was staring at what had just happened to his brother. And then suddenly, Luffy launched forward, bouncing like a rubber bullet, and in a blink, he was beside Kizaru. A giant white fist stretched high, then came crashing down like a hammer. Kizaru barely dodged, the blow smashing the ground and creating a crater so deep that smoke poured out of it. Luffy bounced to the side and caught Sakazuki's next punch with his own hand. The magma hissed against his fingers, but Luffy began spinning Sakazuki like a wheel while his eyes popped out like a cartoon. He then launched Sakazuki toward Kizaru, making the two crash together. Ace's jaw had dropped, looking at what was happening. Luffy landed beside him, still glowing white, his eyes full of light. Ace snapped out of his disbelief and stood up. His flames weren't as strong as before, but he wasn't going to let his brother fight alone. The two stood together. Side by side, the two brothers attacked. Luffy's fists moved like waves, stretching, bouncing, whipping through the air. Ace's fire shot in spirals, bursting into explosions that lit up the sky. Kizaru and Sakazuki fought back, but even they were pushed back. The two brothers didn't stop. Every time Luffy stretched forward, Ace followed with a blast of fire. Every time Ace was hit, Luffy caught him, laughing as he spun, and launched both of them back into the fray. Then the ground shook as an earthquake created a crack between the brothers and the admirals, and Whitebeard stood right behind the two. His Basento cracked with power. A quake bubble shimmered around his fist as Whitebeard punched the two admirals and sent them flying in an instant toward towers and stone walls. Whitebeard stood tall, bloodied but proud. Ace jumped toward the man he called father and hugged him tight, all the while crying and apologizing to him for what he had done. Whitebeard laughed before placing a hand on Ace's head. He told him that it was time they went home. Luffy's awakening finally wore out as he couldn't hold it for too long, and Whitebeard grabbed both of the brothers before he caused another massive earthquake that made Marineford rumble and shatter. The Marines were in dire straits. Then, almost suddenly, another crew appeared on the battlefield. Everyone looked toward the red-haired captain of that crew. Shanks, another emperor of the sea, had arrived at this war. Shanks stood tall in front of his crew. Ben Beckman, Yasopp, and Lucky Roo followed closely. Marines tensed, but the red-haired pirates didn't raise their weapons. Shanks spoke loudly and tried to convince Sengoku that they needed to end this war and stop any unnecessary bloodshed. His presence, his haki, it was like a mountain pressing down on the battlefield. Weaker fighters dropped to their knees. Even the strongest Marines hesitated. But the Marines hadn't completed their mission. If they backed down here, then that would mean admitting defeat in front of the entire world. Whitebeard had already called Marco, who had taken both Ace and Luffy away from the battlefield while he stood there. He knew that things could take a turn for the worse. Ace and Luffy were both carried to the Moby Dick. Marco helped Ace sit beside Luffy, who had passed out from exhaustion. The brothers were safe for now, but Whitebeard had stayed behind on the battlefield. Then the unthinkable happened. Blackbeard arrived in a cloak of shadows and pierced Whitebeard from behind with Shiryu. Whitebeard tried to turn and form his power in his fist, but the darkness absorbed it. His devil fruit was useless. The darkness wrapped around him, and in the next instant, Whitebeard was gone. He stood there unmoving with a massive hole in his chest, and Teach stood there with his fists raised, laughing loudly. One was covered in darkness, while the other was surrounded by the bubble of the Gura Gura no Mi. From the deck of the Moby Dick, Ace watched it all, and something inside him snapped. His fire burned again, but this time it didn't rise gently. It exploded. The air around him lit up. The flames turned almost white hot. Marco tried to stop him, but Ace was already in the sky, a trail of fire behind him. He flew straight back to Marineford. He didn't care about the ceasefire. He didn't care about anything. All he saw was that Blackbeard had stabbed Whitebeard in the back and now stood with his father's power. The man who betrayed the family. The man who now stood laughing with two devil fruit powers. The war reignited in Ace's heart. Shanks saw it too, and even Sengoku was in shock at what had happened. As Blackbeard laughed, some of his crewmates stepped in to block Ace. They didn't last long. Bursts of flame tore through them, so hot that the ground turned to glass. Screams echoed as Ace's rage turned deadly. He moved faster than before. His flames danced like fury itself. He was stopped by Jesus Burgess and Vasco shot while Blackbeard made his retreat. Marines tried to push forward, but Shanks and his crew moved to block them. With calm but deadly force, they kept the line. Shanks didn't raise his sword, but his crew stood firm. No one passed. The pirates were exhausted, and the Marines were uncertain. Ace was screaming after Blackbeard as he was plowing into Burgess and Vasco. His flames pierced through Burgess, who began burning, and Vasco himself was having a hard time keeping Ace back. But Blackbeard had escaped, covered in darkness with the rest of his crew. Vasco was thrown into the rubble, and Ace's flames exploded, melting everything around him. This was when Shanks stepped in. Ace, blinded by fury, attacked him. Fire whips lashed out, but Shanks weaved through them. He closed the distance. Ace summoned a firestorm, but Shanks slashed through it with his blade, scattering the flames. Their clash was short but brutal. Ace roared, sending a fire pillar toward the sky, but Shanks unleashed his haki and struck the pillar, causing it to dissipate. He then hit Ace with a haki-infused punch. With one move, he knocked Ace to the ground, not with cruelty, but with weight. Ace lay there, breathing hard. His flames burned low. Shanks kept him down and told him to calm himself. Luffy arrived a moment later, still weakened but awake, as Marco carried him to Ace. He fell beside his brother and placed a hand on his shoulder, making Ace calm down. Ace's breath steadied. The tears in his eyes dried as he looked at his brother. Then, at Shanks. Shanks then got up and turned toward the Marines. He stated that Whitebeard was dead, but they would not be taking Ace. Shanks turned to Sengoku, his sword now back in its sheath. He spoke with calm authority as he told Sengoku to order the ceasefire. Sengoku, tired and filled with grief, agreed. The red-haired pirates, the Whitebeard remnants, and the brothers were allowed to leave. Ace and Luffy were taken away with Marco and the others. The sea closed behind them. The battle was over, but the world had lost a massive pillar of the seas. Whitebeard was dead, and now the evil and ambitious Blackbeard held all of his power. The seas grew quiet after Marineford, but only for a while. Ace and Luffy had awakened to their powers, but Ace was still heartbroken over what had happened. Luffy stayed with him for the next few weeks and finally picked his brother up from his sadness. Ace vowed that he would not let Whitebeard's memory fade and that he would carry on the mantle of the crew. He would also get stronger and he would get his revenge on Blackbeard, but this time he wouldn't put his revenge above his crew. He realized what his recklessness had taken from him, and he didn't want anyone else to suffer because of his mistakes, especially not his family. The two decided that they would get much stronger and learn how to properly control their powers. So they parted ways. Luffy left for Rusukana, where Rayleigh waited for him. He asked Rayleigh to train him, and so began 2 years of training where Luffy learned to master his new form, which he dubbed Gear 5. The former Pirate King's right hand took Luffy under his wing and taught him everything he knew and how best he should handle his powers. Luffy trained his hardest and quickly learned how to control his abilities and their limits. He could turn trees into whips, bounce, and grab lightning. He danced between punches with his goofy, wild form that could twist reality itself. But Rayleigh made sure he learned focus. He taught Luffy how to use haki with this new power, how to stay grounded. Meanwhile, Ace took over the Whitebeard pirates, and he kept Whitebeard's territories safe from Blackbeard as best as he could. In his numerous battles, he continued getting stronger and learned to better control his flames. With Marco and the other commanders at his side, Ace became a symbol. His awakening was unmatched. His flames could melt steel, tear through warships, and blot out the sun. The world gave him a title and acknowledged him as Whitebeard's successor. He had become an emperor of the sea. Ace was now a Yonko. Despite this, Blackbeard continued to expand his influence, but Ace never went directly after him alone. He would get his revenge, but Blackbeard was as slippery as an eel, and Ace wouldn't put himself in a position that might risk his crewmates. Because despite everything, Blackbeard now had 2 devil fruit powers, and he was, in simple words, strong. 2 years passed, and Luffy reunited with the rest of his crew, who had all been training in different places after what happened at Sabaody Archipelago. Everyone was much stronger than before, and they were now ready for the challenges of the new world, especially Luffy, who had increased his strength unimaginably. From there, the story rolled forward quickly. In Dressrosa, Luffy faced the warlord Doflamingo, who was ruling the island with an iron fist. This is also where he met Sabo. He saw Sabo sneaking in the shadows and ended up following him. Seeing Luffy, Sabo's memories were reignited, and he finally reunited with his brother. Sabo told Luffy that he would go meet Ace too, after telling him all about his amnesia and what had happened all those years ago. Luffy then turned his attention back to Doflamingo. He was in for a world of surprise when he realized that Luffy was in a league of his own. Doflamingo had awakened his own devil fruit as well, but he couldn't even begin to compare with the power that Luffy's awakening had. Luffy danced through attacks, slapping buildings aside and stretching through Doflamingo's strings like they were toys. The citizens of Dressrosa watched in shock as Luffy stomped Doflamingo into the ground with ease. The final blow sent the warlord flying into the side of his own palace unconscious. The world government took notice, and so did the other major players in the seas. Dressrosa had been liberated, and the Marines already knew that Luffy had fought against their admirals on equal footing. Then came the mission on Whole Cake Island after Sanji had left the crew. Luffy followed him to Big Mom's territory. Originally, the plan was just to get in and save their friend, but that devolved into a whole lot of fighting. No one proved to be an opponent for Luffy, and although he tried to avoid fighting as much as possible, he did get into quite a few scuffles. But nothing stayed simple for long. The Tea Party turned into a battlefield. The Straw Hats ran, dodged, and fought their way through a land of deadly homies and powerful opponents before Big Mom directly faced them. She was an absolute beast of a woman who had an extremely intimidating aura. She descended like a storm, with punches strong enough to shatter mountains and some incredibly strong homies beside her. But it wasn't wise to place bets on Big Mom in this fight. As Luffy faced her, he quickly changed to Gear 5 with a wide grin on his face. Big Mom summoned Prometheus and Hera. Fire and lightning rained down. Luffy grabbed the floor, twisted it, and launched himself up. He smashed her with a giant rubber mallet formed from his arm. She crashed into the ground. cracking it. She rose angrier, using soul focus. Luffy laughed, unaffected, and wrapped her in rubber waves. She broke free with a roar, creating a firestorm. Luffy inflated his body and absorbed the flames, bouncing them back. Prometheus was destroyed in the blast. She punched him with full strength. He slid back but turned the punch into a spin and slammed her with a huge rubber bell attack. She flew into a building, dazed. Luffy charged, twisted his legs, and kicked her in the face with a double-strength gum-gum whip. But she retaliated and tried to grab his soul with Hera's power, but he turned his body into a balloon, bouncing the attack back. The fight raged for hours, but the end came when Luffy shot high into the sky, stretched wide, then came down like a meteor. Luffy created a giant rubber fist the size of a building and slammed it down with everything he had. Big Mom's eyes rolled back as the ground broke under her. He defeated Big Mom and quickly retreated with Sanji and the rest of his crew while the entire island was in chaos. Another emperor had fallen. Luffy, with his laughter and lightheartedness, had defeated one of the most feared beings alive. News of the victory spread quickly. Ace read the papers aboard his ship and smiled. His little brother had come far. Now, there were two brothers who had the title of emperor, and the world government was in a panic. This was one of the strongest families out there. But meanwhile, Blackbeard was making his own plans. Luffy went to Wano after that and defeated Kaido after a long and intense battle. Kaido transformed into his dragon form and used strong attacks, but Luffy fought back using Gear 5. In the end, Luffy with his allies came out on top as the victor and freed Wano from his grasp. While people across the world celebrated Luffy's victory, Blackbeard made a move in secret. He made a deal with the Five Elders. Nobody knew the full reason, but it gave Blackbeard more freedom and power. He started taking over more territory and built a larger army. Luffy's journey continued. His crew sailed to Egghead Island and met Vegapunk. There, Luffy learned about the Void Century, the ancient weapons, and the true rulers of the world. It was the first time Luffy saw how big the problem really was, and it was the first time Luffy had to face immortal beings. The Elders, Kizaru and Saturn arrived to capture Vegapunk, but Luffy fought back with Gear 5. He held them off, but then the rest of the Elders arrived. If it wasn't for Emmett, they might have lost their lives there. But fate was working in Luffy's favor. After Egghead, Luffy traveled to Elbaf. There, trouble arose in the form of the God's Knights, but Luffy stepped in and helped solve the problem. He made friends with Loki, the Prince of Elbaf. Loki promised that Elbaf would support Luffy if he ever needed help. The world was tense. The revolutionaries began moving again. Dragon made plans for a large strike. Shanks also started preparing for something big. All signs pointed to a final battle. Blackbeard helped the world government capture Sabo, a high commander of the revolutionaries. Ace and Luffy both read the news, and they knew what they had to do. Luffy called his allies. The Grand Fleet returned. The fishmen joined. The samurai of Wano prepared their swords. The giants of Elbaf sent their warships. Shanks came with the Red Force. And then Ace arrived with the Whitebeard pirates, his flames burning stronger than ever. The final war began at Mary Jawaz. The sky was dark from smoke and cannon fire. Giants broke through the walls. Marines and God's Knights rushed to defend the Holy Land while the celestial dragons tried to escape. The war at Mary Jawaz had fully begun. Allies from all over the world stormed the Holy Land. Giants broke down the main gates. Samurai, fishmen, and revolutionaries poured into the city. The world government released everything they had. The God's Knights came first. They were fast, strong, and effectively immortal, but the allies were enough to keep them at bay. Zoro clashed blades with Shamrock and held him back, while Sanji, Jinbei, and the rest held the front lines. Dragon led the revolutionaries against another group as the Five Elders arrived next. Each one turned into a massive monster. Saturn was a spider-like demon with poison legs and glowing eyes. Warcurry turned into a giant boar that smashed through buildings. Mars flew overhead, spitting fire as a huge bird. Jupiter became a sandworm that swallowed everything in its path while Nusjuro swung his cursed blade. Together with Shanks and Loki, Luffy and Ace made their way through the Elders, bent on going to the dungeons to free their brother and put an end to the world government once and for all. Luffy grabbed Saturn and slammed him into the ground, bouncing him off buildings. Ace burned through Jupiter while Zoro, Sabo, and Sanji helped push back the others, but the Elders kept regenerating. Then, the ground cracked. Blackbeard arrived with Emu's body over his shoulder. Blackbeard had found out about Emu during his time with the world government, and he had used the chaos of this battle to surprise and overcome the ruler of the world with the power of his Yami Yami no Mi. The Elders looked at Blackbeard with fury and went toward him, but Blackbeard ended up piercing Emu's heart and stealing his power. The Elders began to turn to dust as their immortality faded, and Blackbeard had gained the power of a devil. His body began to morph and turn huge. His body twisted unnaturally as it grew into the form of a demon. His voice echoed without sound. He floated above the ruined city, surrounded by black storms and red lightning. He destroyed half the battlefield with one move. Ships sank, mountains cracked, soldiers were wiped out without a trace, and Blackbeard laughed his menacing laugh. He had effectively become a god. But Ace stood up. His flames burned brighter than ever. Luffy's heartbeat pounded like thunder. The brothers faced Blackbeard. Blackbeard tried to crush them with darkness. Luffy dodged by bouncing through the air. Ace burned away the shadows with blue-white fire. Blackbeard used earthquakes to split the ground, but Luffy bent it back like rubber and punched straight through it. Ace flew overhead, blasting down waves of fire that pierced through the darkness. Blackbeard hit Ace hard, but Luffy caught him with a giant stretched hand. They kept switching in and out, covering each other. Ace's awakened fire created a massive sun above Mary Joaz. He dropped it on Blackbeard as Luffy continued keeping him at bay with Shanks, Dragon, and Loki beside him. The God's Knights were falling with Emu's death, and Blackbeard barely knew how to handle all the power clawing inside him. Ace charged up his strongest attack. Flames wrapped around his body. His fire took the shape of a phoenix. At the same time, Luffy grew into a massive Gear 5 version of himself. They hit Blackbeard at the same time, and a giant explosion rocked the sky. When the smoke cleared, Blackbeard lay broken on the ground. His body was burned, cracked, and barely moving. His darkness faded. His stolen powers stopped working. His crew had already been defeated. It was over. The world government was gone. The 5 elders had fallen. Emu was dead. The throne had been destroyed. Sabo was saved from his shackles, and the 3 brothers united once more. The world was finally liberated. Make sure to smash the like button and subscribe for more One Piece videos.